The door came off its hinges behind her. Not loudly. That was the part she would remember later, how little noise it made, how the sound of it giving way was almost polite compared to what had happened on the other side of it. Chioma moved through the corridor with her hand pressed flat against the wall and her blazer torn at the shoulder, and the specific kind of focus that arrived when everything else had been stripped away and only the next step remained. Left. Forward. The stairwell. Down. Before we get into the story, if you love intense underworld drama like this, make sure you subscribe to Whispers in the Underworld. You don't want to miss what is coming next. She hit the ground floor and pushed through the exit, and the night air of Seoul came at her cold and immediate, and she stood on the pavement and breathed and did not let herself think about what was on her hands, because thinking about it would mean stopping, and she could not stop yet. A black car was parked across the street. She noticed it the way you notice things when your senses have been sharpened past their normal range, peripherally, automatically, filing it without deciding to. The car was still. The engine was off. And then the door opened. The man who stepped out was not in a hurry. That was the first thing. He moved with the deliberate, unhurried economy of someone who had never once needed urgency to make a situation resolve in his favor. Tall. Dark suit, fitted precisely, white shirt open at the collar. And at his throat, crawling upward from beneath the fabric, a tattoo, dark and intricate, the kind that did not belong on a man dressed this well and belonged on him completely. He crossed the street. He stopped in front of her. He did not look at the building she had come out of, did not look at the street behind her, did not perform the scan of someone calculating threat. He looked at her face. Then at her hands. Then at her blazer, at the blood on the shoulder, at the way she was holding herself, the very specific stillness of a woman whose composure was the last thing she had, and she knew it, and she was spending it carefully. He looked at all of this in the space of 4 seconds. Then he asked, very quietly. Who hurt you? Chioma's throat closed. She had prepared, across the 10 minutes since the door and the corridor and the cold pavement, approximately 17 different versions of what she would say to the first person who spoke to her. She had prepared for a stranger with a phone, prepared for a security guard with a procedure, prepared for a police officer with a form and a biro, and the particular bureaucratic patience of someone for whom this was a Tuesday. She had not prepared for this. For a man who asked that question in that voice, quiet, direct, carrying no performance of sympathy, no careful diplomatic distance, who simply stood in front of her and waited as though the question had been placed in the space between them and would remain there, patient, until she was ready to reach for it. She did not answer. He did not push. He did not fill the silence with reassurance or reach toward her or do any of the practice things that people did when they wanted to help without actually entering the situation. He stood with his hands at his sides and his eyes on her face, and he gave her the full and complete weight of the question without asking her to carry it alone. Get in the car, he said. Chioma looked at him for one more moment. She looked at the car. She looked at the building she had come out of and the street that was, for now, empty. She got in the car. The property near the Han River was not a hotel. It had the bones of one, clean lines, good furniture, windows that went floor to ceiling and showed the river moving dark and steady below, but a hotel had a lobby, had a desk, had the low ambient noise of strangers existing nearby. This had none of that. It had silence of a specific quality. The silence of a place that had been made deliberately quiet by someone who understood the difference between quiet and empty. A woman named Ji Yun arrived 20 minutes after Chioma did. She carried a folded set of clothes and set them on the bed without comment, and then held out a sealed clear bag and looked at Chioma's blazer with the patient, neutral expression of someone who had been asked to do this before and had learned that the least useful thing she could offer was a reaction. Chioma took the bag. She folded the blazer into it and sealed it and handed it back, and Ji Yun left without asking a single question, which was the most considerate thing anyone had done for her in recent memory. She did not sleep well. She slept enough. Vincenzo arrived at 8 in the morning with 2 coffees and no explanation for the coffees. He set one in front of her and sat down across the table and did not open anything, did not check anything, did not arrange his hands or his face into the posture of a man about to conduct an interview. He simply sat and looked at her with the complete and unhurried attention of someone who had made a decision to be present and was honoring it. The river was visible behind him through the glass. "You don't have to tell me yet," he said. He picked up his coffee. "But you will tell me." It was not a threat. It carried no edge, no implication of consequence. It was a statement of fact delivered in the same quiet register as the question on the pavement, certain, unhurried, leaving the full weight of it in the space between them without asking her to move it. Chioma picked up her coffee and said nothing. He accepted this without adjustment, without visible recalibration, as though her silence was simply the next piece of information and he had filed it exactly where it belonged. He finished his coffee. He stood. He left. She looked at the river for a long time after the door closed. Sungmin was not a man who brought incomplete information. In 4 years of working for Vincenzo, he had learned that an incomplete file was more dangerous than no file at all, because a partial picture created the specific kind of confidence that produced mistakes. So when he arrived on Wednesday morning with the preliminary report, Vincenzo understood before opening it that what was inside was not preliminary in any meaningful sense. It was simply the first layer, delivered because the layers beneath it required a different kind of conversation. The building security logs from that night had taken 36 hours to obtain. The lease on the 6th floor office was registered to a company called Meridian SAE, Cleaning Corporation, legitimate address, 2 years of unremarkable filing history. One layer down, Meridian SAE was a subsidiary of a holding structure registered in Singapore. 2 layers, the Singapore structure connected to a financial channel that Vincenzo's people recognized because they had seen its architecture before, the specific way it was built, the signature of someone who understood how to make money move without leaving footprints. Vincenzo read the file once. He set it on the desk. He looked at the wall. "Who in our network has access to this building?" he said. Sungmin said he would check. He left. He came back 4 hours later and stood in the doorway with the answer already visible in the particular stillness of his face, the stillness of a man delivering news that changes the shape of a room. The answer was Do-won. Vincenzo did not react. He absorbed the information the way he absorbed everything, quietly, completely, filing it somewhere precise and internal where it would stay until he needed it. His expression did not shift. His hands did not move. He picked up his phone. He typed a message to Chioma. "Ji-yun will take you anywhere you need to go today. Tell her where." He set the phone down. He sat at his desk for a long time after that, looking at nothing in particular, and the file stayed open in front of him, and he did not read it again. He did not need to. He had it exactly. The flash drive was small. That was the thing that struck her sometimes, how small it was relative to what it contained, how easily it sat in the inner pocket of a jacket, how a person could carry something like this through an airport, through a customs queue, through the ordinary unremarkable geography of a working day, and no one would know. She had been carrying it for 9 days. She had found it the way she found most things worth finding, sideways, by accident, while looking for something else entirely. The original audit had been routine. A freight forwarding discrepancy in a mid-sized Lagos logistics firm, the kind of irregularity that appeared in international trade compliance work with enough regularity that there was a procedure for it, a form, a timeline. She had followed the procedure. And then one thread had connected to another thread in a way that the procedure did not have a category for, and she had followed that instead, because she was extraordinarily good at her job and extraordinarily bad at leaving a thread unpooled. 14 months of financial records. A Lagos-based subsidiary that did not appear in any public filing. Channels that officially did not exist routing money through structures that were built, she understood immediately, by someone who knew exactly what they were doing and had been doing it for long enough to be confident. The soul connection had taken her 3 days to trace. She had a name for the network by the end of the 4th day. She had not been supposed to have that name. The meeting she arranged to ask a single careful question about it was the last ordinary thing she did before the door and the corridor and the cold pavement and the man with the quiet voice and the neck tattoo who asked her who hurt her and did not push when she didn't answer. She sat in the safe house on Thursday afternoon with the drive in her open palm. She looked at it for a long time. The river moved outside the window, indifferent and continuous. She closed her hand around the drive. She put it back in her pocket. She was not ready. She did not yet know what ready would cost her here, in this particular orbit, with this particular man. Until she knew that, the drive stayed where it was. 3 weeks was long enough for a pattern to establish itself without being named. Vincenzo came in the evenings. Not every evening, there were gaps, 2 or 3 days sometimes, where the safe house held only its deliberate quiet and the sound of the river and Ji-yun moving efficiently through whatever Ji-yun moved through, but enough evenings that Chioma had begun, without deciding to notice the ones he didn't. She noticed this noticing and did not examine it further. She was already carrying enough things she hadn't decided what to do with. When he came he did not announce an agenda. He sat at the table with a glass and his documents and she sat at the other end of the sofa with her laptop and they occupied the same room in a silence that had changed quality somewhere around the end of the 2nd week. It had stopped being the silence of 2 people being careful around each other. It had become something else, something that sat in the space between them with a kind of settled weight, and she did not have a word for it and did not go looking for one. One evening he said, without looking up from the page in front of him, "You're not sleeping." She did not ask how he knew. "No," she said. He closed the document. He set it on the table. He looked at her with the full attention she was learning to recognize as his default, not performed, not adjusted for effect, simply complete. "Tell me something that is not about this," he said. She looked at him. He looked at her. The river moved outside. She told him about Lagos. Not the operation, not the audit, not any of the things that had delivered her to this room. Lagos the city, the market 2 streets from her mother's house where the tomatoes were stacked in careful pyramids and the sellers knew her by the way she walked. The quality of the light in the late afternoon, the specific gold of it, the way it made everything look like it was being remembered rather than happening. He listened without moving. He did not offer anything into the space while she spoke. He simply received it, all of it, with the same unhurried attention he gave everything that he had decided mattered. When she stopped he was quiet for a moment. "Come back tomorrow," he said. He picked up his glass and his documents and he left. Chioma sat in the quiet he left behind and looked at the window and did not think about what it meant that she already knew she would. Do-won was a careful man. He had built a career on carefulness, on the particular discipline of knowing exactly how much to see and exactly how much to appear not to have seen. It had served him well for 11 years inside Vincenzo's network. It had made him trusted. It had made him, from certain angles, invisible in the way that deeply embedded things became invisible, present so consistently that the eye stopped registering them as anything requiring attention. He found out on a Monday. Not through any single source but through the accumulation of small details that a careful man assembled without being asked to, a car logged at the wrong address, a woman who had not surfaced anywhere she should have surfaced in 3 weeks, the specific silence where a resolved problem should have been. He ran the details against each other and arrived at a conclusion he did not like. He made 2 calls. The first was to a contact in the Busan group. Not to share anything, not yet, only to establish the existence of the line, to make sure there was somewhere to move toward if the geometry of the situation shifted in a direction that required it. The second was to a man whose number he had held for 2 years without using, which was the kind of preparation that careful men made and hoped never to need. Vincenzo's surveillance team picked up both calls before midnight. Sung-min was at Vincenzo's door at 7 Tuesday morning without waiting for the scheduled briefing. He placed the intercept transcripts on the desk and stood back. Vincenzo read them. He read them once, the way he read everything once, and set them down. He picked up his phone and called Ji-yeon. "She does not leave the property today," he said. "Tell her it's a scheduling issue." He ended the call. He knew Ji-yeon would tell Chioma no such thing. Ji-yeon had been with him for 6 years and had never once softened a situation in a way that created a larger problem later. He knew Chioma would understand exactly what the restriction meant, that something had moved, that the edges of what was safe had shifted overnight. He was not ready to explain it to her yet. He needed the shape of it to be complete in his own hands before he placed any part of it in hers. She did not plan it for Wednesday specifically. Wednesday was simply the day she woke up and understood that the weight of the thing in her pocket had reached the precise limit of what she could continue to carry without it changing her in ways she would not be able to reverse. She placed the flash drive on the table between them and sat back and folded her hands and looked at his face. She did not say anything first. There was nothing to say first that the drive did not already say more clearly. Vincenzo looked at the drive. He looked at her. He picked it up and turned it over once in his fingers, not examining it, just holding it, the way a person held something when they were giving themselves a moment to arrive at the right question. "How long?" he said. She told him everything. The original audit, the freight discrepancy that was supposed to be routine, the thread she had followed because she was constitutionally incapable of leaving threads unpooled. The 14 months of records. The subsidiary that didn't exist in any public filing. The sole network connection that had taken her 4 days to trace and that she had not been supposed to find. The meeting she had arranged because she believed she was walking into a conversation with a mid-level manager about a documentation irregularity. The moment she understood she was not. He listened without moving. He did not shift in his chair, did not adjust his expression, did not offer anything into the space while she spoke. He simply received it, all of it, with the same complete and unhurried attention he gave everything he had decided required it. When she finished he was quiet for a moment. "You were going to handle this yourself," he said. It was not a question. "Yes," she said. He set the drive down on the table. Carefully. The way a person set something down when they understood its full weight and were choosing to place it gently. "How long were you going to carry this alone?" The question was soft. It carried no accusation, no edge of reproach, nothing that required defending against. It was simply the question, placed in the space between them with the same quiet certainty as every other question he had ever asked her. That was what broke her. Vincenzo did not move quickly. He had learned across many years and several irreversible situations that speed was the preference of men who were not certain, who needed momentum to substitute for precision. He was certain. He took 5 days. The financial threads were traced individually, each one followed to its terminus and documented in a format that left no interpretive room. The Busan contact Do-won had called on Monday was identified by Wednesday: name, connection history, current positioning within the Busan group structure, the specific nature of what Do-won had been offering him without yet offering it explicitly. It was noted. It was filed. It would be addressed on its own timeline. On Friday morning, Vincenzo called a meeting of his senior operational team. He arrived last, which was unusual. He sat to the left and slightly back from the head of the table, which was also unusual, and the people in that room who had been there long enough read both things correctly and said nothing. The folder was already at the head of the table when Do-won sat down. Do-won looked at the folder. He looked at Vincenzo. He opened the folder. His face went through several things in quick succession. The carefulness he had spent 11 years perfecting dissolved in stages, each one more complete than the last, the composure that had made him trusted and invisible inside this organization failing him in the one room where it mattered most. He did not speak. There was nothing available to say that the folder did not already answer. Vincenzo spoke for 4 minutes. He did not raise his voice once. He did not need to. The room was very quiet and every word landed exactly where he placed it. Do-won left the building that afternoon and did not come back. By Sunday the Lagos channel was closed, the subsidiary dissolved, the financial architecture dismantled in the specific thorough way that Vincenzo dismantled things he wanted to be certain would not reassemble. By Wednesday the Busan situation was resolved in a 2-hour meeting that cost him a territorial concession he had already scheduled to make. He simply moved the timeline forward. He noted no visible irritation about this. The timeline had always been approximate. Safety, it turned out, had a texture she did not recognize. She had been operating inside threat for long enough that its removal did not feel like relief so much as disorientation, the absence of the low constant calculation, the perpetual background assessment of exits and angles and what the next 12 hours required, leaving a space in her that she did not immediately know how to inhabit. She sat with this for several days. She was honest enough with herself to find it concerning. She had not realized how much of her architecture had been built around the thing that was no longer there. Ji-Yun brought coffee on a Thursday morning and set it down and said, without preamble, "He's been at his desk since 5. Chioma looked up. "I didn't ask," she said. Ji-Yun said nothing further. She collected the previous cup and left with the specific unhurried efficiency of a woman who had delivered the information she intended to deliver and required nothing back from it. Chioma looked at the river for a while. Then she picked up her jacket. Vincenzo's building was 20 minutes from the safe house. She had never been inside it. She stood at the entrance and understood that she had arrived without a reason prepared, which was new, and that she was going in anyway, which was newer. He opened the door and looked at her. He stepped back to let her in without comment, without surprise, as though this was simply the next thing on a list that had always included it and had now reached it in the natural order. She sat at the counter. He moved to the kitchen. She watched him fill the kettle and set it on and take 2 cups from the shelf, doing it himself, all of it, which she had never seen him do. There was always someone who made the tea. He was making the tea. He set her cup in front of her with his hand open, the cup resting in his palm. She reached for it. Their fingers touched on the transfer and neither of them moved for a moment, the cup between them, the kettle quiet, the city outside doing what cities did. "I don't know how to do this," she said. "Neither do I," he said. "We'll work it out." He did not become someone different. That was the thing she kept returning to, that nothing about him had softened or shifted into a version of himself designed for her benefit. He was still precise. Still the man who ran an organization that could not afford imprecision, who spoke in rooms where every word was load-bearing, who moved through the world with the particular economy of someone who had never once needed more than he used. But in the specific geography of the spaces they shared, things changed in ways that were small and completely impossible to ignore. He started leaving one light on in the kitchen when he knew she was coming. She started arriving without being asked. He stood closer than necessary in rooms that were large enough that proximity was always a choice, and she stopped moving back, and neither of them remarked on any of it, and it accumulated anyway. Her firm offered her a sole posting in the 3rd month. She took it and told him afterward, not before, because she had learned, across careful increments, the difference between a decision and a permission, and she was not interested in blurring that line. He looked at her when she told him. Something in his expression settled in the way she had come to recognize, the specific internal resolution of a man whose calculation has returned the result he was hoping for and who will not say so directly. "There's a permanent room in the building if you want it," he said. "I'll keep my apartment," she said. "Yes," he said. "Then, a beat, for now." She looked at him. He looked at his glass. The corner of his mouth moved by the smallest and most controlled degree. She did not press it. She picked up her tea and looked out at Seoul below, the Han River in the distance holding its permanent indifferent course, the light at this hour doing what the light did over a city that had not been built for her and had become hers regardless. The blazer was gone. Ji-Yun had taken it the first night and Chioma had never asked where. She did not need it back. She had stopped needing what it represented. She carried herself differently now, not softened, not smaller, but differently armored. The armor was still there. It simply no longer faced him. They built slowly and with full knowledge of the cost. They did not look away from the cost. They added to it willingly, and that was the whole of it, and it was enough.